Hi everyone. In this tutorial I'm going to be showing you how I made this rendering of this Earth-like planet using only procedural textures. That way you can completely randomize it and make it however you like. So let's get started. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is just change my render engine from the Eevee render engine to Cycles. The next thing I'm going to do is just delete everything in the scene. So I'm just going to press A, X and select OK to delete everything. Okay, so let's just drag this up, change this to the shader editor, and the first thing we're going to want to do is make the Earth. So I'm just going to go Shift A, Mesh, and create a new UV sphere. I'm going to scale it up by a factor of 3, S3, go over here to the right hand side, select the modifier, subdivision surface modifier, just to smooth out the sphere a little bit. I'm going to give it 2 levels of subdivision. Then I'm going to right click on my sphere and go Shade Smooth, just to get that nice smooth shading appearance. Okay, so let's add a material to this Earth. So if we go down here on the right hand side, click the little red button and add new material, we'll get this new node group here for the material. So the first step towards developing this Earth texture is to try and make the continents. So I did this with a mixture of noise textures. So let's start by adding a noise. So Shift A, S for search, add a noise texture, and just drop it here. And I found a combination of 2 noise textures added together gave me quite a good result. So I'm just going to click on the first noise texture and go Shift D to duplicate, just bring it down here, and you want to add a mix RGB node to combine these 2 together. So Shift A, S, mix RGB, and just drop that next to them. And you want to connect either the factor or the color input into the color 1 from the first noise texture, and then the same from the second. So if you've got Node Wrangler installed, if you don't, you can go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Node Wrangler. You can see here I've already got it ticked on. But if you've got that, you can click on the mix texture, and you can go Control Shift and left click, and that will give you this viewer node here. First thing I want to do though is just generate the texture coordinates. So if you've got the Node Wrangler module turned on now, you can just click on the noise texture and go Control T, and that'll add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node for you here. So you can see here we've got the generated coordinates. We want to use the object coordinates. So drag object up to vector, and then you want to drag this vector node here into the corresponding noise texture at the bottom. So now let's press Control and left click on the mix. Sorry, Control Shift left click on the mix, and click up here to go to viewport shading mode, and we can start to see what we're working on here. So we're getting this black and white sort of noise texture here, and we want to change these scale values so that we can get something that sort of looks like continents. So just playing around with some of the values that I got previously, if we bring the scale all the way down to something like 0.1, and the scale on the second one, I'm going to use a value of about 0.5. You can see here, you can't really see much at the moment. So we want to rescale the input image color, so we'll just add a color ramp. So if you press Shift A, S, and add a color ramp in here, we can try and bring out some of that detail. So if I just bring down this black slider here, now you can see regions of black and white. So we want to adjust these parameters so that we get sort of black and white regions indicating the ocean and our land. So the next thing I did was just change the mix to an add, and just play around with these sliders a little bit more. You may have to click on the sphere depending on the scale that you've selected, and go Control A and apply scale. Just because these texture coordinates may depend on the size of the sphere. So you can see we're starting to get a little bit more detail now. So if you just play with these scale options a little bit, and then drag your slider bar around a little bit, starting to see we're getting areas of land and areas of ocean. And I'm pretty happy with that. Adding the detail gives you a little bit more detail around the continents. That looks pretty good there. So the white will represent our continents and the blue will represent our ocean. So the next thing you want to do now is try and add some colors to these different regions here. So you can do that with the color ramp here. So with this bottom color ramp, I'm going to try and change the color from black to something that looks a little bit more like ocean. So I'm going to sort of give it a dark blue color here. Something like that, looks pretty good. Then we're going to press the plus button to add in another one of these sliders here. And I'm going to give it a slightly lighter blue color. So this dark blue and the light blue are going to represent our dark parts of the ocean, and the light blue is going to represent our lighter parts or shallower parts of the ocean. So I'll just drag that down a little bit more. See, we've got these very dark parts, and we'll play around with that a bit more in a minute. Let's add another slider now. Just drag it further to the right. So the next thing we want to do is sort of add like a sandy beach area to surround each of the different continents. So let's just pick something like that's not too bad. For your top slider that's already selected, you want to change it from white to something that sort of looks like, I don't know, grass or forest or something like that. So like a dark green color. And add one more slider in here between the sand color and the grass and make it sort of like, I don't know, like a muddy color. So like this dark brown color. And then you just basically want to adjust your slider bars to sort of suit your own personal style. So you get the sandy edge here followed by sort of a muddy region right next to it. And then sort of the green grass, or I don't know what you could call it, forest area. And then just make some sort of fine tweaks just here to sort of get different size continents just to suit your own liking. Well, that's not looking too bad. But yeah, basically you just need to play around with these sliders to get the sort of look that you're trying to get. And that's a pretty good starting point there. So you just want to go back here now, and you want to, at the moment, using the node wrangler, we connected the color ramp to the viewer node. So what you want to do now is just connect your color output from the color ramp into the base color of the principled BSDF shader. I've got these out of order, so I'm just going to bring them around here. And then connect the BSDF output to the surface from your material output shader. And you can see we've got a pretty good starting point for our base Earth shader. So you can see here we've sort of got a reflective surface all over the sphere of the Earth. So you want to somehow control this reflectivity so the ocean is more reflective than the land. So you can do this using the same combination of noise textures we produced earlier. So you want the ocean to be shiny and you want the land to be very diffuse. So if we create another color ramp here and search for color ramp, just put it just below here and connect the color output of the add mix RGB node to the fraction of the color ramp, and connect the color of your second color ramp to your roughness. So what we're doing here is just using the mask that we produced in the first mix RGB shader here. In fact, I can show you here. Just connect it back up to the viewer node. Actually, let's connect it here so you can see. So this was our mask that we produced to make the continents. So I'm just going to use the same mask to control the roughness or the reflectivity of the planet to try and get that shine on the oceans. So let's just delete that and connect the color back up to the roughness and connect our shaders back up again. And I'm going to go to rendered mode. And you can see it's quite dark. So at this point here, I'm just going to try and add a sun texture, a sunlight into the scene. First thing I'm going to do is go to my environment and just lower that all the way to 0. So because space is black. And then I'm just going to add in let's have a look here. Let's just add a sun lamp. At the moment it's pointing right down, so I'm just going to move it across a little bit. Double tap R so I can just rotate it to some arbitrary angle. Now let's go back to rendered mode. You can see we've got a bit of a light now. I'm just going to increase the strength to about, let's have a look, about 5. Alright, so let's go back to our shader now. And you can see, without changing much already, you can see the ocean's got this sort of reflective surface, but if you rotate the camera a little bit, you can see that the land itself isn't giving us much reflection, which is kind of what we were after. Just drag that back a little bit. You kind of just need to play around with these settings a little bit yourself until you get a result that you're happy with. Now I'm pretty happy with the way it is at the moment, but we might need to change the settings a little bit later once we've added the different parts of the planet. But yeah, you can see that the land itself isn't reflective, but the ocean is. So that's good. So let's move on to adding clouds to this scene now. So let's just go back to the viewport shading mode. So to make the clouds, you'd basically just want to make a thin layer with another shader on it that's just slightly bigger than the Earth. In fact, let's just go over here to the right hand side and rename our sphere. We'll just call that, let's just call it ground. Okay, so we want to duplicate the ground sphere, so Shift D, and just scale it up very slightly. That's probably just enough. If we go to wireframe, you can see I've barely increased the radius at all. But let's rename ground 1 to clouds. Let's go over to our materials, just duplicate the material and delete it, and we'll start fresh. We'll just create a brand new material for this. So this shade is going to be fairly straightforward. If we just go back to the viewport shading mode, and the first thing you're going to do is add a noise texture again. So let's add the noise, and Control T again, just to add your texture coordinates and your mapping nodes. Let's connect this time the UV output to the vector here. I'm going to go back to my clouds and go Control A while I have the cloud selected and just apply the scale just to normalize out the scale. Then with it selected, I'm going to go Tab, I'm going to go UV and Spherical Projection, and then press Tab to get out of edit mode. So let's just press Control Shift and left click, and let's just have a look at what our clouds are looking like at the moment. So we've got a similar issue to what we had with the Earth. You've just got very dull, patchy white and black areas. So let's just add a color ramp in here in front of the noise texture. Just drag that down a little bit, and you can see it's not looking a lot like clouds at all at the moment. So let's just play around with these values here. So let's just go maybe about there. Let's increase the detail a little bit. Roughness we might increase a little bit. Just give that fine detail on the edges, and just increase the distortion just a little bit. And let's just drag these around. And if you increase the detail again, you start to get something that sort of looks like very patchy clouds. And that looks pretty good there. So again, this is just going to be the mask for our cloud texture. So we'll be able to see the ground through the clouds with some sort of transparency. So I've got a principled shader in here, so I'm just going to delete that. Just click on it and press X. And you want to connect your mask here from the color ramp into a mix shader. So let's have one of those. Plug that in there and delete the viewer node. Connect up the mix shader to your material output. Now you want to connect your mask, which is the color output, into the fraction input of the mask shader, mix shader, sorry. And you want to add a diffuse BSDF and connect that to the top input. And you want to add a transparent BSDF into the bottom shader. So that'll allow us to have the white clouds and everything else transparent, so you can see down to the ground. So we're not actually seeing anything at this point, so it's funny, it's looking quite strange. But you may actually have to flip these color ramps around. So move the black to the bottom and then just drag your white down, and there you've got it. Got this sort of patchy cloud just on top of the ground there. And you can just play around with these sliders to sort of increase or decrease the amount of cloud you're getting. You can add a bit more scale to it until you get the sort of patchy cloud, or you can make it less patchy if you want to by changing the detail, but that looks pretty good there. I'm happy with that. And you can even pick up the cloud layer with by clicking on it and pressing double R, and that'll let you rotate around the planet. And you could animate the clouds moving if you wanted to. You could even switch the 3D noise texture to the 4D noise texture and use this W parameter to sort of give you a dynamically changing cloud atmosphere sort of thing, which is kind of cool. Right, so I'm pretty happy with those clouds there. So the next thing we need to do is move on and make the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is probably the easiest of the three shaders to make. The way you do this is basically take your clouds layer, duplicate it again, and just scale it up with S and drag your mouse wheel just slightly, so it's just slightly bigger than the cloud sphere. It's a bit hard to see, but I think I have made that just big enough, but we can fix that a bit later. I'm just going to rename my clouds layer to atmosphere, and again I'm going to delete the material that was on my clouds layer and just create a new shader for this layer. So the way you do this is by first adding a mix shader, deleting your principled BSDF shader, connect the output of your mix shader to your surface in the material output node. I'm going to add a transparent BSDF and connect that to the first shader input of the mix shader. Then I'm going to add a diffuse and connect that into the bottom input. Next thing you want to do is try and control this using the fraction input. So first thing I'm going to do is add a layer weight node here. And this will allow us to have a more dense atmosphere on the edges of the planet when we look at it through the camera, and not so much when we're looking face on. I'll show you more what that means in a minute, but we're going to control this with a color ramp node, which I'm just going to place right in front of the layer weight. We want to connect the facing node to the fraction input of the color ramp, and connect the color to the fraction input of the mix shader. So let's just have a look what this looks like. So let's just take the color ramp output and just press Control Shift and left click on there, and we can start to see this sort of effect it's going to give us. So you can see we've got a lot of weight on the edges of the sphere and not much in the middle, which is kind of the look we're after, but it's a little bit too strong. So I'm going to reduce this blend factor a little bit. That looks pretty good. And then just drag this top slider bar back a little bit as well, just so we're getting this effect right on the edge. Now, once you've done that, delete the viewer node, connect your shader back up to the surface, and you want to change the diffuse color to something that's a bit blue, because the Earth's atmosphere appears blue, the sky, and that looks pretty good. And we'll switch over to rendered view now. And let's just play with these slider bars a little bit. So you can see if I slide the color ramp all the way to the left, you get a lot of atmosphere when viewed from all directions. But if I drag this slider bar to the right, we sort of get a concentration of atmosphere right on the edges here, not so much in the middle and not so much on that side. Again, this is all sort of personal preference, whatever you want your planet to look like. Let's just drag this down a little bit, just so I can see what it looks like. But I'm fairly happy with the result. I might just scale down the atmosphere layer a little bit. I think it's probably a little bit too thick, but that's looking pretty good now. So just because it's space, we want to have some stars in our scene as well. So I'm going to show you a quick way that I add stars to my space scenes. So with the shader window up here, switch object to world. Again, we want to add another noise texture. Wonderful noise textures, you can do everything with them. So you want to increase the scale up to something like 250, and then you want to put a color ramp between that. So let's just connect those up. So fraction to fraction, color to color, and say increase the strength to something like 7 or 8. And let's just go over to our viewport shading or rendered mode. See, it's way too bright here, but you can see the sort of speckled effect in the background from the noise. Let's just drag this right down. See, we're starting to get what something looks like stars. Let's increase the scale even more. You just want to make these really, really tiny pinpoints of light, and then drag this down further to decrease the number of stars. And you can see we're starting to get a few speckled stars, but I'm just going to increase it a little bit. I want a few more stars in my scene. And there you have it. With a little bit more tweaking the values in my shader setup, I was able to produce this semi-realistic looking Earth in no time at all. I'd suggest to add a bit more realism, perhaps add a displacement map to the continents, using the mask that we used to make the continents in the first place, and maybe add a noise texture to the ocean to give it a more bumpy or rough look. Thanks for watching this tutorial. I'm planning to continue this series of procedurally generated planets. If you want to see more of these videos, please don't forget to subscribe.